Hey there, friends, it's me, Em again, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things sinister. As always, if you are interested in true crime or if you like all things horror related, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. That way you can join me for some morbid conversation. And you guys, today's story, it just doesn't even seem real, okay? Like, I was reading about it and I was researching on it. And the more I read into it, it just doesn't seem real. It's so bizarre. It's the weirdest story I think I've ever come across. It's just so bizarre. And what really sucks about today's story is it takes place in the UK. And since it involves minors, there's actually a court order out. So the names of any of the minors that are involved in the story, their real names cannot be released. So it's hard to find more information beyond just this story, which this story in itself is, like I said, it's really, really bizarre, but I usually like to dig a little deeper. And with this one, I really can't. So I'll tell you what I know, and we will talk about what I know. And yeah, let's get into it. It's weird. Okay, so follow me here because it's a little confusing. There's quite a bit of characters. I've even downsized some of the characters to kind of weed out lesser important, in my opinion, lesser important people. And the story mainly takes place with Mark and John. They are the two main characters, but there are definitely background characters and supplemental characters that we have to hit on. So, okay, so let's start with one of the main characters. We are going to talk about Mark, who at the time was 16 years old, pretty popular guy in school. He played a lot of sports, had a lot of friends, and this was during the early 2000s. So in his free time, Mark liked to get on the internet. The internet was just now starting to come into people's homes. It was just now starting to get popular. Mark's family was one of the families that paid a little bit extra for that broadband internet to get away from dial-up. You know, they didn't have to tie up the phone lines just to get on the computer. So Mark was able to get online often. And since this was the early 2000s, one of the cool things to do, especially for teenagers, when you got on the computer was to get into chat rooms online. And Mark did that, namely MSN chat rooms. And that's where he spent a lot of his free time. Now, when he was in these chat rooms, Mark would often keep an eye out for, any local girls. It was a local teenage chat room for the Manchester area. And so he was hoping to be able to flirt with some girls. He was a teenager. He was 16 years old at the time, and he was just looking to be a little bit of a flirt. And one girl did come into the chat. Her username was Rachel West, and she entered the chat, and she was a beautiful blonde. And her and Mark hit it off. They started chatting, and it went just beyond that day. They would both regularly get onto the chat room, and they would look for each other, and they would chat so much that Mark actually developed feelings for Rachel, and Rachel developed feelings for Mark. They, for lack of better words, it's like they were dating online. They had never met each other in person, but they were pretty friendly online. Rachel would even talk Mark into doing some explicit actions on his webcam, which he would comply with. He was really head over heels for Rachel, and he wanted to make her happy, and he wanted to keep her interested. So when she said jump, he said how high. I mean, the two of them were very much flirtatious beyond the point of normal. Now, shortly after meeting Rachel, another person got in the chat room, and this was John, the other main character in this whole convoluted story. And Rachel had told Mark that John was her younger brother. John at the time was 14 years old, and she said that it was his younger brother. Now, Mark would reach out, and he'd talk to John too. And the two of them actually hit it off really well, and they became really good friends, and they would message each other often. It did get to the point where they almost became like best friends. You know, John would tell Mark things that he hadn't told anybody else. Mark would tell John things he hadn't told anybody else. Mark would tell John about how he was catching feelings for Rachel. They were very close friends in their little online world. The three of them were often online together. It was often Mark, John, and Rachel online together. All right. So we've got 3 people so far. Now, another person at the time also joined the online chat room. And this was a person named Kevin. Now, Kevin joined the chat room and he was very open about his sexuality. He talked about how he was homosexual. He was vulgar in the chat room. Apparently, he had threatened to abduct and rape not only John, but also Rachel. Now, this is where you really start to see the gullibility in children and why the internet can be such a scary place. Like, I am a mom and I was reading this story, and I mean, these are kids, they're teenage kids. They should know better, but the fact that they don't know better, oh, my mama heart. Let me just tell you, my mama heart. I was reading this and I was like, oh my God, one. Well, anyway, so Kevin threatened to abduct John and Rachel and rape them and murder them, but said that he wouldn't if Mark got on his webcam in a private conversation and performed explicit acts on the camera. And Mark did it. Mark went ahead and did that, and he said that he did that because he loved Rachel and he didn't want anything to happen to her. So yeah, he did it for her. Mark, John, Kevin, and Rachel. Now, Rachel would end up disappearing from the chats. And the reason why, come to find out, is that apparently Kevin abducted her anyway and assaulted her anyway and gang raped her with some other people to the point where Rachel didn't survive. And he taunted Mark in the chats and through private message with this information. Now, why Mark didn't go to the police, why Mark didn't tell his parents, I don't know. Like, I really don't know. Kids are so... I don't know how kids' brains work. Maybe he was afraid that something would happen to John. I don't know. I don't know. But he didn't. Now, despite the fact that Rachel suddenly disappeared out of Mark's life, he and John actually continued to get closer. The two of them even ended up meeting in person, meeting in real life. Once they confirmed with each other on webcam, hey, you really are who you say you are. The two of them set to meet in real life, and they did. And they like I said, their friendship grew. They became best friends. They were very close. John's parents met Mark's parents. Like, they had a pretty great friendship that spun out of this online chat. Now, on June 29th, 2003, the two boys, Mark and John, were actually hanging out with each other, and they were visiting local shops in Greater Manchester, just kind of walking around, browsing, and they wound up going down an alley together. Now, when they went down this alley, that is when things would take a very sinister turn. And the reason why is when they went down that alley, John would end up being stabbed almost to death. He got stabbed once in the chest, between the ribs, and then he got stabbed in the lower abdomen. And when he actually got stabbed in the lower abdomen, it went pretty deep It damaged his liver. It damaged his kidney. He ended up having to have surgery to have his gallbladder removed. Like I said, it was a pretty serious situation. Mark did end up getting the equivalent of 911 on the phone, which I think is 999. And they got an ambulance out there. Mark was immediately put into emergency surgery. He was in critical condition, but after his surgery, he was stabilized. And he did end up surviving the attack. So hallelujah, 14-year-old boy, thank God he ended up surviving the attack. Now, of course, he would end up being questioned about the attack when he was stabilized. And Mark would be questioned about the attack almost immediately by police. And the consensus was that there was an older white man, who was in a black hooded jacket with a baseball cap on, who had stabbed him, seemingly just at random, stabbed him in the alley and then took off running. So at least police had a lead to go on. They could check the surrounding CCTV in the area, and they could look for any sort of man in this dark jacket with a ball cap on, in close proximity to the alley, entering the alley, leaving the alley. And so that's what they did. They started acquiring the CCTV from the surrounding areas. They even had some CCTV that went directly on the entrance of the alley. The problem is that no matter how much footage they checked, no matter how far back they went, they never saw anybody with that description, but nobody enter or exit that alley besides Mark and John. So they approached the boys with that information, and John ended up breaking down and saying, Mark stabbed me. Mark would also later admit and plead guilty to attempted murder. So they were best friends. Why would you stab your best friend? We have to rewind because, like I said, this is bizarre, and it's only going to get weirder from here on out. So let's rewind. Like I said, there are a lot of characters in this story. One of those characters was a person named Janet Dobinson. So Janice Dobinson actually worked for the British Secret Service, and she had told Mark that the agency had had their eyes on him for quite some time, and they were interested in recruiting him into their ranks. So she had convinced Mark that he was already being watched by other secret agents in the area, and that anybody could be a secret agent. The postman, the grocery store clerk, the neighbor across the street. It was possible for there to be undercover agents anywhere and everywhere, and everyone had their eyes on Mark. So Janet had convinced Mark that if he wanted to be part of this organization, he would have to complete basically a recruiting assignment. And during this process of her talking to him, she asked him if he would be able to kill someone, namely if he'd be able to kill somebody close to himself. And Mark said that he would if it was for the greater good, and she assured him that it was. Now, Janet had told Mark that John, his best friend, had a very large inoperable brain tumor, which John himself actually confirmed. John told Mark sometime later that he had gotten word back from his doctor that he had gone to the doctor because he had been feeling depressed, and so they had done some tests on him, and a scan came back showing he had a large tumor on his brain. And this is something that Janet knew about. And so she told Mark that he was terminal anyway, and that he had an inoperable brain tumor, and that he needed to die sooner than his tumor would kill him. and that she believed that the most effective way to do it would be to send in an agent that was close to him, which is why this would be Mark's recruitment assignment. Now, Mark did push back, and he said, "Won't that be murder?" And she assured him that in the case of working for the British Secret Service, it would not be. Those situations would not be something that would be murder charges for. It would be coming as basically like an order from the Queen, and orders from the Queen trump all. When he asked why John needed to be killed, if the tumor was already killing him, why he needed to be killed sooner, Janet told him that she could not tell him. She also told him that if he completed this mission, he would receive a signed contract of employment for the Secret Service. He would receive about 80 million pounds, so a good chunk of money. And she alluded to even some sexual favors if he would just complete this task. And so, with the naivety of children, he agreed. Once he agreed to carry out this mission, Janet went into full swing, and she told him what kind of knife to use, told him it couldn't be a pocket knife, it had to be a knife with a blade of 6 inches, because he was going to want to stab him and stab him deep and leave him to bleed out. She told him that he shouldn't wear gloves, but he should mention that the assailant wore gloves. That way it wasn't weird that Mark's fingerprints were the only fingerprints on the knife. She told him to make sure to call 911, but not to call 911 too quickly, because we want John to be able to bleed out and die. We don't want to risk the chance of him surviving. She told Mark that it was likely that he could get arrested, but if he did, not to worry, because she would take care of that if that were to happen. As an agent, she was higher than the local law, so if he were to get arrested for this, not to worry about it, because it would be taken care of. She told him where to take John. She told him what to say to him as he's stabbing him. She told him to make sure to tell him, "Oh, just trust me," and to tell him that he loved him. And so he did. He did. In fact, not only did he do that, when they were out shopping in Greater Manchester, he told John he had to purchase a knife, took John to a store, and let John pick out the kitchen knife that he would stab him with, just a little bit later. His best friend. Kids are so gullible. This story is so bizarre. Now, when Mark was arrested, Mark never talked about Janet. He never mentioned the Secret Service. He said that the voices had told him to do it, and I don't know if that was because he thought he needed to play his cool and not blow his cover, but he didn't mention Janet at all. So that's a pretty crazy story, right? We can all agree that this is a really weird story where a best friend is convinced by a stranger online that he is now auditioning for the Secret Service at the young age of 16 years old, and in order to be recruited successfully into the Secret Service, he has to murder his best friend, and he agrees to it. We can all agree that's pretty weird, right? That's pretty weird, right? Like I said, this is one of the weirdest cases I have come across. But it gets so much weirder. Because 3 or 4 months later, John is arrested. And John is arrested. And he is charged with inciting to commit murder of himself. It literally made UK history. Never before had somebody been charged with inciting to commit murder of themselves. So let's dive into that. For that, we've got to backtrack a little bit more, and now we will talk about John. Who John is, what his story is, and how he incited murder upon himself. Okay, so you see, for as much time as Mark spent online, John spent even more time online. Unlike Mark, who had friends and who had sports going for him, John didn't have that. John did not have a lot of friends. John was bullied so much in school. He was called terrorist and packy because of the way he looked, and because of his ethnicity. He was called homophobic slurs, just general bullied. His life was not a happy one. He did not like who he was. He suffered from pretty severe depression. And his home life, I mean, his family did fight quite a bit. And John actually just retired a lot to his room and disappeared on the internet a lot, to the point where it was like addiction, obsessional level. He would sacrifice eating to be online. He would leave his room only for the bare necessities. Otherwise, he was in his room on his laptop at all time. And he did this as an escape from his own life. And when he did this, one of the ways that he would escape is to create different personalities and become different people through the internet. Now, some of those people that he had become was Rachel. He was also Kevin. He was also several other people in the chat room, many of which interacted with Mark. But he was also Janet, the Secret Service agent who set up the hit on himself. Now, the way the police were able to kind of piece all this together, because even the judge in the case who had read over the transcripts, each individual character that John played was astoundingly unique. They had different speaking styles, they had different mannerisms, they had different conversational tones. They were different people. So police combed through all the chat log information because they were very interested in figuring out who this Janet person was. At the time, they didn't know that Janet was John and John was Janet, as well as these other people. So they combed through all the chat logs, and the puzzle pieces finally started to click together one day when a particular pattern was noted by one of the analysts. Sally Hogg was the police analyst who was in charge of going through all these things. And the thing that she saw that was pretty unique was there was a frequent misspelling of the word maybe. And it was spelled Mybye. So specifically misspelled. That's not a typo. That is a specific misspelling, and it's a unique specific misspelling. And there were 4 characters who shared this particular misspelling, and one of them was Janet. So knowing this bit of information, they now began to piece together that maybe this was one person and not a group of other people. They still had no idea what the motivation was, but connecting it as one person, they began to wonder if maybe it was like a pedophile child trafficking company because of all the explicit acts that was asked of Mark to do. They didn't know. They ended up searching Mark's computer and John's computer. And one of the things that they found while doing that was the last person to log into the chat room on John's computer before the stabbing went down was Janet. So Janet definitely logged into John's computer, definitely in his home, and definitely at a certain time. So they looked into that. And at that time, the only person home was John. They ended up confronting John about it and basically putting it all on the table, and John admitted to it. And some of the reasoning, which to me is sad, but it also makes sense, was the fact that his lies were in too deep And it was combined with that and him dealing with depression. You see, when he created the character Rachel West, he created the character Rachel West not for any purpose other than to escape his own life. Like I said, it was just for him, an outlet for him to be somebody else. And when Mark started showing interest in Rachel, it made him feel a certain type of way. He had a friend, he had somebody who was interested in him. Again, then Mark started showing interest in actual John and becoming friends with John. And so he knew that if he had to keep the lie alive, because if he ended up breaking that reality for Mark, they likely wouldn't be friends anymore, especially for how much effort and how much passion Mark put into Rachel. Not to mention the explicit acts that he had done for Rachel, which would in itself infuriate and embarrass him to the point where their friendship wouldn't last that. Mark knew he had to keep the lie up, and keeping the lie up just kind of snowballed, and it ended up culminating with his depression, and it ended up being like the most elaborate ways to commit suicide out there. He ended up running with the idea of getting Mark to stab him, and it's so sad because, like I said, Janet told Mark even the last things to say to him was, "Trust me, I love you." And so even when he knew that he would be dying, his dying wish essentially was just to hear that he was loved by one of his friends, someone that maybe people speculated he had a romantic interest in, especially considering the explicit stuff that he got from Mark and the thrill he got from dating Mark through Rachel online. Mark actually didn't know about any of this until John's trial. And it was at John's trial that Mark found out that John was all these people in his life, which would be, oh my gosh, it would be such a bomb to just have all this dumped on you all at once. And so that's it. Both boys went to trial. John went to trial, like I said, for attempting to solicit murder of himself. And Mark went to trial for attempted murder. Both were found guilty. Both pled guilty. Since they were young and since they were minors, they basically got like a slap on the wrist. They both got a couple years probation. They didn't go to prison or anything. They got a couple years probation. Both of them got banned from internet chat rooms or using the internet, except for under special supervised instances. They were banned from speaking with each other, which I'm sure after Mark found out everything he found out, I really wouldn't personally want to speak to John anyway. But other than that, they're just out there living their lives, which I don't want to ruin two kids' lives. That's not what I'm saying at all, but it's just weird, right? It's just weird. It's so weird. Now, if you're a visual person and you kind of want to see all this play out, they did make a movie based off of this story, and it's called You Want Me to Kill Him? I did watch the movie. It was okay. It was okay. I don't regret watching it. I probably won't watch it again, but it wasn't that bad. I'll link all the information in the description box if you want to watch it. They did change a little bit of information, like they changed kind of who Kevin was and the surrounding information about Kevin. But it was also kind of interesting because a lot of the conversation from the chat room they included in the movie. So like the actual chat conversation between Janet and Mark, that's in the movie. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, it was made into a movie, and it should be made into a movie, and it should be made into an awesome movie because it's just so weird and it just doesn't seem real. I swear, it just doesn't seem real. And like I said, my mama heart, after reading this, my girls are young, but I just how do you raise kids in the world of internet when kids are so dumb? Like, honestly, kids are so dumb. No disrespect out there, but kids are so dumb. They're gullible. And I worry about my kids. But anyway, that was it. I mean, read more into it. There's podcasts out there about it. There's not, like I said, there's not a lot you can find out other than just this story, because they're minors. But Mark and John, the very bizarre story of Mark and John, best friends no more, I guess. Okay, so anyway, friends, thank you so much for joining me today for a very weird, bizarre story. And thank you for letting me get that out of my head and now into yours. Drop your comments below on what you think about this story and what interested you the most. And let me know if you've seen the movie or have even heard of the movie, because I hadn't up until now. Go watch it. Let me know what you think. Until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye.